Good morning everyone. Basa na tayo ng ating libro guys. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo in Guerrero. Busog. Today is the first day of January 2023. Happy New Year everyone. History of the Filipino People, Poetry, Reform and Revolution. Topic number 12, the Malolos Republic. Nandito tayo sa paragraph The Malolos Constitution. Nakatuwid pa yung pa ako. Okay, the Malolos Constitution. In preparing the decree of June 18 and that of June 23, Mabini envisioned the Congress to be an advisory body of the President. He believed that in such period as the country was passing through, it was necessary to have a strong executive. But his idea was contradicted by Congress when it proposed to draft a constitution. Congress advanced the opinion that a modern constitution answering to the needs of the times was imperative in order to secure the recognition of Philippine independence by foreign powers. Mabini, on the other hand, argued that such a delicate task as the framing of the Constitution should be done in a peaceful and quiet mode in order to give the framers sufficient time to deliberate on the proposed provisions. As such a period as they were undergoing, it was not proper to frame a constitution. Moreover, Mabini added that Congress was convoked that to frame a constitution but to advise the President and to give him popular support. Mabini was, however, in the minority, and although his arguments were unassailable, he was defeated by the majority under the leadership of Paterno. Nevertheless, Mabini submitted his constitutional plan of the Philippine Republic, but Congress for the second time overruled him. A committee to draft the Constitution was created with Felipe G. Calderon as its most prominent member. Having set Mabini's constitutional program aside, the committee, under the influence of Calderon, also set aside, but in a subtle manner, Paterno's constitutional plan, which smelled strongly of the Spanish Constitution of 1869. With the advice of Cayetano Arellano, a brilliant but unreconstructed mestizo, Calderon drew up his plans for a constitution deriving inspiration from the Constitution of Mexico, Belgium, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Brazil, and France. Ulitin ko guys With the advice of Cayetano Arellano, a brilliant but unreconstructed mestizo, Calderon drew up his plans for a constitution deriving inspiration from the constitutions of Mexico, Belgium, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Brazil, and France. In the session of October 8, Calderon presented the draft of his constitution. Printed copies of it were made on October 21 and discussions began on October 25. The most tumultuous discussions occurred when the provision making Catholicism the religion of the state came up for the consideration. After much heated debates on the subject, the Congress voted on it. The result was a tie. The second voting resulted in the victory of the separation of the church and state. The partisans of separation won by only one vote, that of Pablo Tixon. Thus, the Calderon project of making Catholicism the state religion was defeated. The provision on the subject of state religion was amended to read, Article 5, the state recognizes the freedom and equality of all religions as well as the separation of the church and state. A few other amendments were inserted in the draft constitution before it was sent to Aguinaldo for approval. On January 21, 1899, Aguinaldo promulgated what is now known as the Malolos Constitution. The protracted discussions that characterized the Congress as the protracted discussions that characterized the Congress sessions on the subject of whether or not church and state should be united showed first that the Filipinos as a people, though up in arms against Catholic Spain, were not anti-Catholic but merely anti-clerical, and second, that many of the delegates learned from the bitter lesson of Philippine history in voting against the union of church and state, which under Spain was the fundamental basis of Spanish colonial system. That decision became the cornerstone of Philippine democracy and showed not only the nationalism and democratic orientation of those who voted for the separation of church and state, but also their keen sense of history. The Constitution. The Malolos Constitution is the first important Filipino document ever produced by the people's representatives. It is anchored in democratic traditions that ultimately had their roots on American soil. It created a Filipino state whose government was popular, representative, and responsible with three distinct branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The Constitution specifically provided for safeguards against abuses and enumerated the national and individual rights not only of the Filipinos but also of the aliens. The legislative powers were exercised by the Assembly of Representatives, composed of delegates elected according to law. To make the function of Congress continuous, the document provided for a permanent commission which would sit as a lawmaking body when Congress was not in session. The Assembly elected the President of the Republic, the cabinet composed of the secretaries of the different departments of the government was responsible not to the President but to the Assembly. The administration of justice was vested in the Supreme Court and in inferior courts to be established according to law. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was to be elected by the Assembly with the concurrence of the President and the Cabinet. The Malolos Constitution is unique for three reasons. First, because of the provisions making the Assembly or the legislative branch superior to either the executive or the judicial branch. Second, because it provided for a permanent commission to sit as a legislative body when the Assembly was not in session, and third, because it established a unicameral legislature. Calderon's argument for the omnipotence of the legislature was that he feared the predominance of the ignorant military elements which were solidly behind Aguinaldo. To counteract their ignorance, Calderon purposely provided for a strong legislative arm so strong that the executive, that is Aguinaldo, would not be able to create an oligarchy composed of ignoramuses. Between an oligarchy of ignorance, as Calderon called the men who fought the enemy, and an oligarchy of intellect, he preferred the latter. To check the executive further, Calderon made provision for the creation of a permanent commission composed of Assembly delegates, which would sit as a legislative body when the Assembly was not in session. Calderon's purpose in including this provision is obvious enough to check the powers of the executive even when the Assembly was in recess. By this method, the executive could not usurp the powers that could make him powerful enough to institute an oligarchy of ignoramuses. Ang hirap man ay. Ulit ko ha. By this method, the executive could not usurp the powers that could make him powerful enough to institute an oligarchy of ignoramuses. As to the unicameral legislature, Calderon pointed out that there was no conflict of interest among the people to justify the creation of bicameral legislature. Moreover, in a country like the Philippines, which was then emerging from the formative stage, a bicameral legislature might only lead to delay in administrative efficiency. A third reason given was that there were not enough competent Filipinos to fill the seats of a bicameral legislature. The Constitution as a whole is a monument to the capacity of the Filipinos to chart their own course along democratic lines. In a period of stern stress, it symbolized the ideals of a people who had emerged from the dark ages into the light of reason. The Philippine Republic. Hanggang the Philippine Republic lang tayo, guys. The Philippine Republic, owing to the objection of Mabini to some provisions of the Constitution, Aguinaldo did not immediately promulgate it. The Congress leaders compromised with Mabini by agreeing to insert amendments to satisfy the President's closest advisor. On January 21, 1899, Aguinaldo finally promulgated the Constitution. Earlier on January 2, he formed his cabinet as follows. Apolinario Mabini, President of the Cabinet and Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Teodoro Sandico, Secretary of the Interior. Baldomero Aguinaldo, kapatid to ni President Emilio Aguinaldo, guys. Secretary of War. Mariano Trias, Secretary of Finance. Graciano Gonzaga, Secretary of Welfare, including Public Instruction, Public Works, Communication, Agriculture, Industry, and Commerce. The Council of Government of the Cabinet, according to Mabini, belongs to no party, nor does it desire to form one. It stands for nothing save the interest of the fatherland. On January 23, 1899, the Philippine Republic was inaugurated at Malolos in colorful ceremonies. Aguinaldo took his oath of office after having been informed that he had been proclaimed President of the Republic. The Malolos Constitution was read article by article, and the army took its oath of loyalty before the President. A review of troops and procession followed. To make the event more memorable, Aguinaldo issued a decree granting pardon to all Spanish prisoners of war who were not members of the Spanish regular army, and at the same time granting the Spaniards and other aliens the right to engage in business within the limits of the Republic. So, bukas na natin basahin yung revolutionary periodicals. January 2 na ito, ibasahin natin. Bye everyone. God bless.